Up next at the Employability Lab, we have two fabulous women taking the stage. We have Rosie Tressler OBE and CEO of Student Minds, the UK student mental health charity. The Student Minds model, approach and breadth of the impact that have been seen from Rosie and the team's work is really incredible, especially in the last few years. Amongst many things, Rosie has overseen the development of the University Mental Health Charter, which is a government-backed research-led initiative which rewards universities for taking preventative whole institution approaches to mental health, which I think we can all agree is the right way to approach mental health within education. And Rosie is joined by the fantastic Rebecca Fielding, founder and managing director of Gradconsult. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Rebecca and Rosie.
Hello, hopefully everybody can hear me. I think we're in the process of getting my camera switched on. But in the meantime, Rosie, for those people who are less familiar with Student Minds, perhaps haven't come across them before, could you start with a kind of brief overview of what it is that you do?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rebecca, and thanks, Claire. Hope that everyone listening in is having a good day. It looks like an amazing lineup. So a little bit about Student Minds. Hey, I can see you now. That's lovely, Rebecca.
Great.
So we are the UK student mental health and wellbeing charity for focus on students, and really fundamental to us is the belief that no student should be held back by their mental health. Our team works really to support and also challenge all those organisations who are part of the student experience. So that's both the university sector, the HE sector, but also it's your health sector, it's what the government is doing politically as well. Making sure that they are involving students in the decisions that affect them, and then holding them to account on that as well through our research and things like the charter, which I know we'll come back to. But we're also really focused around what is it that you can do directly with students. So providing that training, information resources, tools that can help students look after their own mental health, but also look out for their friends, their peers, so that we do start to see together that we can improve those university communities. So that's what our team is working on.
So not much then.
Yeah.
small scope. And I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Rosie, that you and I really came together and made connections and bonded over that realization that a lot of what's happening for students continues into the workplace as well, and that transition from university into the world of work really is quite a vulnerable time for people, as is any kind of key change in our lives. There's a point where we could be doing more, really, and I think I really recognised it in the conversations I was having with our careers and employability colleagues who are here today, that increasingly they were seeing mental health and wellbeing as part of the conversations around that transition out of education and into whatever comes next for them. So for those of you who are wondering where that connection came from, that's really where I think Rosie and I started to talk and think and work together on looking at really student engagement, student success, a life after university, and the links to what the wonderful work you're doing with students in universities at the moment, and how that can actually be extended to graduates as they enter into the world of work. So on that note, as we think about preparing and supporting our final year students this year for what happens next, what are you seeing and hearing at Student Minds, Rosie, from students at the moment in terms of mental health? Because there's a huge amount going on in the external environment, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. I was reflecting on the events, Rebecca, that we did together during the height of the pandemic, and I think when we were, talking about what we were seeing, what students and graduates were having to navigate, I think at that point, maybe rather naively, I thought this might be as bad as it gets in terms of, the trying to keep positive and optimistic. But I think every time I get together with students, and we have a student advisory committee that we get together with every 3 months, to get into really deep discussion about what they're seeing and amongst their friends. And it just feels like their lives are getting increasingly complex all the time. And yeah, a lot of the discussion we end up having with them, there's the typical stuff that we talk about with students around academic pressure, around transition points, around making meaningful friendships and so on. But a lot of the focus and where the students pull us into the discussion, where they want to spend time, is on the political factors that are shaping their lives. So the real big one for this last year, and I know we've got our committee on Sunday, so I know it'll be, again, the focus will be around cost of living. And a lot of our students are about how they're going to afford to pay their rent or make sure they're eating sensibly. And I think sometimes people think that you might be egging that issue on, but it's really backed up in the research. Just today there was a piece in The Guardian sharing Sutton Trust's study with students, and that was again reiterating this issue of over 2/3 of students spending less on food and essentials, nearly 1/3 skipping meals to save on food costs. And one that really worries me is they found nearly half stopping going out with friends or spending time with friends socially. And we know that loneliness is the biggest predictor of student well-being. So, the financial pressures have an impact on all of those other factors as well. So that's one part of it. But then we're also seeing students talking about the pressures they're seeing on public services. So, they're watching the news as we all are and seeing the pressures on the NHS and wondering what does that mean in terms of accessing support, and delays that can be experienced there. The industrial action we're seeing also now recently announced this term as well in universities that, unless we see something change soon, then that will be going ahead. We are having focus groups with students looking at how they are responding to issues around the climate crisis and how that's impacting them day to day. And again, that is something where we're seeing students are thinking about this on a daily basis. It is really shaping, and it will shape the decisions they make about careers. So that, and then on top of that, you've got wider inequalities point. We don't have time, I know, to get into all the areas there today, but you only have to be online for a small amount of time to see the painful, series of news that students are looking at that is telling them about the inequalities still faced, and yes, some very painful experiences experienced by racialized young people, transgender young people. All of that narrative and some of the harmful content online, it all adds to that picture, I think, of what students are dealing with. Yeah.
Sorry, so we're talking about a raft of kind of big, broad, macro, socio-economic, climate type things going on, like climate change, but we haven't even touched on things like the war in Europe, which of course is also, I know, a source of concern for many students, industrial arrest in the public sector. I mean, one of the things we haven't touched on there is the economic climate here in the UK and talk of recession. Are you hearing anything from students as they're starting to think about their job search, about how that's impacting their mental health or well-being, about their confidence, their prospects, what happens for them next? Is that so far down the pecking order in amongst all of these other things that you've talked about that it's not a concern for them at the moment?
No, I did do my homework. I have asked our insight manager on this. Yeah, we as a charity, we do regular pulse surveys, and last July students told us actually employability was the biggest concern for them, above mental health, above finances, above academic work.
Really?
And just before Christmas, for the winter break, we did another pulse survey as well, and it was over half the respondents that was still saying that was a really significant cause of stress for them. So yeah, I think although for us as a charity over years, academic pressure has consistently been the key issue that you expect to come up, this issue with the financial pressures, and then what's the impact of all this uncertainty going to be on my employment prospects? All of those things are so interconnected, aren't they? And they'll feed each other, as well. So yes, it's definitely a time in which the work of careers professionals is so important. And that's why we're talking about it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, increasingly when we talk to careers and employability teams, they can see the relevance and the connectivity between the work of health and well-being, both in curriculum and with professionals within the university ecosystem, and their work really merging between them. It's fascinating to hear that came up as number one last July, and it's still such a significant factor when you did that Christmas survey, reflective perhaps of some of those concerns that people have heading into that final semester, really. So short term then, Rosie, because I know your team do an enormous amount of work across the sector with the mental health charter, with working with a lot of health and wellbeing and mental health professionals across the sector, and student unions as well. If you were thinking specifically about the careers and employability teams who are here today, or perhaps maybe some of the employers who are here today as well, I know have joined us, is there anything in particular you think they could be doing in the short term to support and to make some of those connections, and perhaps allay some of those fears?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that I often start talking and it feels like doom and gloom, but actually I think the reason why there is so much energy on, in working with all these different sectors and the kind of organizations you've just described, is because we know there are lots of things that will work and will help and support. So I wanted to share first, I guess my answer would be, there's a few things I want to rush into, but actually I wanted to share the some feedback I got from a recent graduate in our team. So when I told her I was doing this, and just what was she seeing in her circle of friends? And I think it was a really good reminder to me about just how much value there is in responding to some of the real practical concerns that students have. Because what she was saying was, after so many years of doing online learning, being on Zoom, her and her friends, the thing they keep talking about is things like how overwhelming it is going into the office and being around people and readjusting to that. So sometimes it is, yes, there's all these other parts, but sometimes the practical things make a difference. I'm sorry if I've frozen. I'm on edge of room. So sorry.
Everybody can empathise with that in this audience, I'm sure. Rosie, you're back, don't worry.
I'm back. So yeah, I know that already careers colleagues do a lot of work to sort of normalise, what it's like going into different working environments. And I know that also careers colleagues do a lot of work to try and encourage employers to really make sure those inductions are responding to that context of what the recent cohorts of students have been dealing with. But also another thing she said to me was that she found a lot of the advice that she saw about careers when she was at uni was saying things like, stress your resilience because you've been a student during the pandemic and stuff, and actually finding that quite difficult advice to know how to use. And it made me think about some of the work that we did, Rebecca, with your team on creating content for Student Space about that transition. And it included also having video content and blogs from students and graduates themselves, because I think it's that thing of, we always know, getting information to land with students in a way that feels really authentic and relevant. If you can have a mix, if you can have the professional view and you can also have that peer view of like, well, what was it like for me? How did I make that shift? I think, again, it's that reminder that that co-production piece, that involving students, can make a big difference.
Yeah, and so that was Space is continuing, isn't it? Am I right in saying that you've secured some funding? The government's continued that contract. Do you know how long that's going to be available for? Because it is useful content, isn't it, for people to be able to access? Do you know how long that will be there for?
Yeah, so although it was started for the pandemic, it's now there to stay, to help students through the uncertainty of student life. So, as well as that 3-year commitment from the Office of Students and Higher Education Funding Council for Wales, we're doing all we can to make sure that that support that we started, which has already supported thousands of students through reading that information, watching videos, or accessing the services that we funded as well, such as, support for Punjabi students to get specific support there with the different cultural experiences, support for students who are experiencing eating difficulties. So there's a range of support on there. And we're working hard to continue that full range. So that, you're right, that is one thing that I think colleagues across the sector can use now to give some clear messages, know that it's robust materials, and particularly the section obviously on careers that the team at Gradconsult authored. So yeah, that's a little part of it, but obviously a lot of the issues that we've talked about are more like long term and ingrained.
They are, and I think so. There's the short term bits, and I feel like I cut you off in the middle of your flow then. So was there anything else on your mind in that kind of short term space, those students who are perhaps coming into this year? I mean, for example, the cost of living piece, I didn't realize just how front of mind and what a significant topic that was from students, but you're hearing that loud and clear from the work that you're doing with them and the impact that's having on mental health. Clearly that presents barriers into employment for students as well. So are there things that universities can be doing to, create bursary funds or short-term loans, or could employers be doing more to really help break down some of those barriers for students who are facing financial barriers to actually go to interviews or start work, or all those other things that particularly if they've got to relocate, they're massive financial barriers, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I would, to all of those people, I would be saying to start with the premise that most students are having a challenging time financially. I would just start with that and then you're going to do something genuinely inclusive, right? So we know that sometimes there's a big gap between the data of people who say that they're skipping meals because, and then the number who actually take up the bursary schemes, because it's a hard thing to do actually for a lot of students to say, yes, I need that help. And we, again, there's complex reasons for why that would be, but if you're able to design your processes and your approach from just normalizing the fact that it's not easy for people to ask for that help, then that's a good place to start. We have been calling on anyone with influence on this to improve their offer for students. We've been campaigning, we've been sending letters to the government, we've had meetings at different stages with different politicians as well, and we have a cost of living hub, which I will share in the chat as well, where
Fantastic.
we're setting out what are the facts really, and that students haven't been able to access a lot of the schemes that were available to the general population, and again we're seeing that students haven't necessarily been able to take up the energy savings either. So yeah, we need to see employers as well bearing that in mind, knowing that the cost of a train might be the difference between you getting that brilliant person joining your team, and that's what a loss. But we spent all this time speaking about inclusion and having a diverse workforce, knowing that our best work as organizations comes from having teams that are diverse in all ways, and then this is like just putting such a dampener on those opportunities.
Absolutely. And I think particularly for students who've really seen very little increase in their income in terms of loans or even part-time work, we're not seeing significant increases in that lower end of the salary market to keep up with the cost of living. As you say, they haven't been shielded from the cost of living in the same way that much of the population have. So fuel's gone up, rent's gone up, food's gone up. There is nowhere for most students here to hide, is there, unless they are very, very lucky. So that's a very practical thing. that we across the careers and employability ecosystem could be doing here and calling for more here is to normalise and to signpost that support as a, did you know this money is available to all students to support you with interviews or with you know, I don't know, there are some funds which support people to get suits and things if you do still need them in certain sectors, you might do, or travel, or whatever it might be. That's something simple we can all do in our communications to really open that up and normalize it.
Yeah, and just that point you're making about part-time jobs, and just again, because the data showing us that students had to pick up more hours.
Yeah.
So I know we've spoken about this before about the issue that then creates, you know, I know there's so many fantastic sessions that careers departments put on for students, but that is the thing that's going to give, you know, when you're having to balance that work and study. So I know we've spoken before about how could we see more of this embedded in the curriculum. You know, there are, you know, if we could be continuing in the work that I know has been started on more academics being joined up with both their wellbeing services and their career services, and making sure that those sort of core messages, materials are getting through to students that don't have currently, or don't feel they have the capacity to go and attend that workshop as well.
Absolutely. We were hearing about that earlier, about how, you know, we need to reframe our thinking so that we really are giving them what they need within curriculum around what students need, rather than Tom talked about us designing content for what works for, you know, semesters and for facilities and for academics, and actually reframing that to think about what works for students, what works for employers, and repositioning our thinking in that way. I think that embedding in curriculum has come through again and again and again today, and it leads me nicely, because I'm conscious we've already had 21 minutes and I don't know where it's gone, and I do want to leave some time for questions, so please leave any questions for Rosie in the Q&A. I'll get to as many as I can in the last couple of minutes. What about the longer term? Because many people on this call will know about how we are interweaving and embedding employability into curriculum, or indeed extracting from curriculum, if that's your preferred stance on the approach. But I understand you're doing similar work in the longer term to look at health and well-being. So again, it's not separate from, but is part of the ecosystem. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think in the long term, I mean, there's resources, there's work that we've done over the last 5-6 years that is still relevant, right? Even though, you know, a lot of the content has changed, there's still things that we, yourselves, other organizations have been saying that still stand. So I'll link to that past research we did on graduate wellbeing in 2017, the University Mental Health Charter, which was co-developed with thousands of students and staff, full literature review, which really says what's needed across a whole institution to create those sort of healthy communities. But to think about that point on curriculum, we worked with Advance HE and 3 universities to look at how do you really design curriculum to support wellbeing, and it's resulted in a very comprehensive toolkit. I know that this stuff takes time.
Rosie,
it is free,
freely available.
Free.
That's what we like.
Whack it all in the link.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's I think it's recognizing what's going to land differently with a student on a gaming course is going to be different to what's going to land with a student on the history course, and how do you use slightly different approaches there. So I definitely check that out. But I think just going back to that point about what in the long term, you won't be surprised to hear me say that the biggest thing I would say to anyone who's working in university is to get involved with the whole university approach, is to recognize what your role is within that, because everything university is already doing already contributes and impacts on the mental health and well-being of those individuals, whether you like it or not. What you already do has an effect. So this is about being deliberate and conscious, and you know, through the charter program, it enables universities to bring together all those staff. We run lots of workshops to help on particular parts of it. We then go in and help do an assessment of the institution, where we really look at all the evidence. We give they write a report to us on how they're getting on. We write one back that says, this is what our assessment team has found, 50 odd page documents that really give that support, because this isn't easy. This, as we've talked about today, there's so many factors involved in shaping mental health and wellbeing. So to really achieve that joined up approach, it's deliberate work across the silos that naturally understandably happen in universities. And we're seeing the impact that that's making. We've announced before Christmas the first few unis that have got the Charter Award, and we've got 60 universities now participating in the programme. But we're seeing some recurring themes. Staff wellbeing, you won't be surprised, is the real concern. How well we're doing student voice and participation. So following on from Tom's session, there's still a lot of work to do there. How well we get our governance right for this work as well, and inclusion. But there's lots to it. And I think, just to share back to this network, that we will be sharing every year a report which says, what are we learning through this? What can you take forward? But if you're not already as a careers professional involved in that work, I just think you've got so much knowledge, so much to contribute to it, and it's missing a trick if those teams aren't working together.
Absolutely. And I really feel, Rosie, I'm sure you do too, from where you started to where we are now as a sector, it's just, the mental health and wellbeing support and consideration and just conversation that's happening across universities has significantly moved on, hasn't it, from where we were in that period. No doubt still lots of work to be done, but a completely different place from where we started. And I do worry, going back to one of your first points about access to support services, once you leave university, I worry about the disparity between what students do have access to whilst they're still students, and then that almost dropping off a cliff experience. And that's where I really hear careers and employability professionals are one of the few teams who often continue those relationships and conversation with students into the summer, into the autumn, sometimes longer if graduates are finding it hard to find work. Is there more? I know you can't, perhaps you can't, it's not in your gift, but is there more that universities could be doing to kind of provide a parachute, I suppose, out of the level of support that they get for mental health and wellbeing within universities, and what they will expect once they're out? I know the counterpoint to that is they were lucky to have more support than most of us, and there's still more to do, and everybody should have access to great mental health and support. But in the reality of the paradigm that we currently have, what's your view on whether or not we should be seeing an extension or an integration of services there?
It's interesting. I mean, we want to see a strong health system as well as within institutions. And I mean, I always want people to be encouraged if they feel that they are at the point where things are too difficult for them and they want us support, to still reach out, because they will get follow-up. It's the thing that we as a campaign organization are just banging the drum about, is about that there needs to be quicker access to the effective treatments, right? But I think I have heard of some institutions looking at what they could extend to their graduate community, recognizing that we are creating these sort of artificial points where sometimes the relationship ends. So I think that's interesting. I think also the employers thinking about the role that they have in terms of supporting with work-based pressures as well. But again,
and that onboarding process as well. So actually that gap between university and coming in, that key transition, how can I support before that, or perhaps extend my mental health and wellbeing support forward as well as universities pushing it back? There could be a nice overlap there, couldn't there?
Yeah, I think so. But I think what opportunity we have at university is prevention. It's about enabling students with knowledge, skills, approaches that should support them through whatever else gets thrown at them in life as well. So there's that's where I think the real opportunity here is in prevention. We'll keep advocating, we'll keep campaigning to make sure when people need additional support, that it's there, but it's the, there are too many people experiencing difficulties at the moment where it's preventable if we address the social issues that are influencing it.
Perfect.
So
I can see we've got 2 questions in the Q&A. I don't know if we're going to have time to put them both on, but nobody else has come on camera yet to give me the you need to be finishing, Mrs. Fielding. So I'm going to try and squeeze them in. A wonderful question from Alina. Thank you. Are you seeing that the issues students are facing are equally distributed between home, domestic students and international students, or are you seeing significant differences?
Yeah, in summary, lots of differences.
Oh, wow.
We did a study with international students working alongside an international students panel last year.
Yeah.
And that was working with CAPLAN, and that is available on one of the links I shared. That go and read that research. It's fascinating actually what the international students were telling us they were experiencing. I think it's just essentially everything we talked about today and more complexity and hard things to navigate. So yeah, I'm really glad that people are thinking about how they tailor for international student groups there.
Absolutely, and we've got some wonderful colleagues here today, I know, specialised supporting the employability and careers guidance for international students. Final question for you, which comes from Helen. Helen has said, do you have a quick kind of golden nugget of advice if I come across staff who seem somewhat unsympathetic to students now? I think that they get loads of support compared to what I used to get back in the day, often comparing it to, their own student experience. But how would you, perhaps, if you had one piece of advice, I'm sure there's many in your training courses, but how would you perhaps open that door to get them to reframe their thinking?
I think a lot of the time when people are feeling like that, it's often to do with the own pressures that they're feeling as well. Because it's easy for us to step into that compassionate space and think, well, actually, when I was a student, maybe actually the world was a little different. Maybe there are different challenges that I haven't seen. It's a bit easy to be in a compassionate space when we also feel like we're supported and we have the tools and the thinking space to engage with these issues. And I think, although there's been calls, and we talk about the training in the charter as well, there are calls for people need to feel confident in their role and responsibility here and their obligations under the Equality Act as well, to feel confident about that. You do need to have the space to learn. It's the same with other issues to do with inclusion as well. People need space to reflect, to learn, to confront maybe some of the biases that we have growing up in our society that, although there's been progress made, are still there. So I would say I'd probably want to start with, what is it that's making it feel that way, and kind of see if you've ever thought of engaging with some of the professional development on offer to support with these issues as well. But not an easy conversation to have. We've all probably had them around Christmas dinner tables as well, and it's not easy, is it?
It's not easy, but very politely and beautifully handled as always, Rosie. One of the things I always love about spending time with you. Thank you so much for spending your time with us